Hello guys, my name is Glurmit and today I'm going to be helping you guys learn a little bit about how to set those god tier defenses. Now for anyone who follows me on YouTube or whatever and watches the streams, you'll know that I typically play a very defensive style, and even if I don't do too well on offense, I normally somehow come through with a win, and it's because of the defensive structure that I have in place. I spend a lot of time planning and making sure I set traps and certain teams are being placed in certain places to try and help me win, because I know that I sometimes struggle from an offensive point of view. So today I'm going to be breaking down the video by Timecodes, so if you want to see a certain section, just go to the description and you can go straight to it and see what it looks like. So the first thing we're going to cover today, guys, is knowing your opponent. You don't have to know them inside out, but if you do, it's going to benefit you a lot more. I actually saw a video on Nucci's channel a few weeks back, and he spoke to someone who was in Kaiba with like 1 GO and exec, and they said themselves they got there because they were planning and scouting their opponent. It is a massive advantage, and the reason for this, guys, is because it allows you to know what you can set and what you can't set. So for example, guys, we're going to go through and I'm going to give you some example characters. I've listed JML, Lord Vader, SLKR, Jabba, C, and so forth, and all these guys. Obviously Leia can be included as well. We've then got Zori, Rex, Merrin, and Reva, and there's a reason I'm picking these out, because depending on what your opponent has, or depending on what you have, and obviously this changes depending on your GP or what you have accessible to you, is gonna depend on what you set. So for example, guys, does your opponent have Fennec? If it's a no, you can absolutely set Lord Vader and save more and save that extra team. If your opponent has Fennec, then you're probably going to want to have more with Lord Vader. So that's like the first stage of setting defense, is knowing your limitations and knowing what your opponent has in the bag to try and deal with you. For example, does your opponent have Reva? Does your opponent have a solid JML counter? If no, by all means set it. Again with Kylo, does your opponent have the traditional counters? If no, he's going to be a god. There's a reason why Kylo is near on unbeatable until you get into Bronzium and Erodium, because not many people have those counters accessible. So by setting him, he is effectively going to lock down a zone. And the same goes for fleets, guys, with Executive Profundity and Leviathan. Does your opponent have Merrin? Does your opponent have Captain Rex? If either of these things are happening, his viability goes down. So it's important to know this in preparation of your Grand Arena. You just want to make sure these things are all set up so that you know going in. And then finally we have C. Does your opponent have SLKR? If no, C Savage is literally going to be your win condition. The reason I included like Zori and friends is just because these are examples of those characters which you're looking for when planning defenses. So you can find out stuff about your opponent through hot utils, that you can do it for free if you put in your ally codes and you know your opponent's one, or you can do it through .gg, which is even easier, and you just go on there and go into Gac bracket and just look there. So once you kind of know what your opponent's going to do, it's important to start with a structure for the defense. And what I mean by this, guys, is we're going for a skeleton here. This is going to be the staple teams. These are the teams that traditionally will just stay on defense. Sometimes they change, but most of the time you expect to see them and you set them. And this includes the likes of Lord Vader, Ray-Ben, Zori, Seer, Jabba. Obviously there's more, but just for purpose of time in this video, I want to kind of keep it a little bit shorter. But these are all examples of characters who will always be seen on defense because they always draw something good. Like we said with Know Your Opponent, in the case of Lord Vader, you can take Maul away if your opponent does not have a Fennec. But if they do, then Maul's obviously going to be here. Then we have, you know, for example, Ray-Ben as an example of a staple. Obviously, if your opponent has Starkiller, you just need to spend a bit of time looking into their win rate with Starkiller. Is there any, you know, situation where they're losing? Are there any lineups that perform better? If you have GAC Insight or even just use .gg, you can find out this information pretty decently. There are some Starkiller lineups, or anti-Starkiller lineups, should I say, that do have like a 50 to 60% win rate, which is better than the 80 to 90 that we're used to seeing for Starkiller. And then after you've looked at staple teams, guys, we're then going to be having our flex teams. So these are teams which can rotate between offense and defense. Part of setting a really good defense is having that flexibility. For example, one day I will set Dash, the next day I will set JML, the next day I will set someone else like Night Sisters. It's always changing, and the reason you want to do this is because if you want that defensive stronghold in Grand Arena, you're going to need to be rotating things, keeping it fresh. Not only does it mean you can change up your counters for offense, but it also means your opponent is going to be in a zone where they do not know what's going to happen. For example, you might be someone who afros Jabba, so your opponent plans for that, but then all of a sudden you go and use Trench, or you use Krex, or someone like this, and all of a sudden your opponent cannot plan for this, because no matter what they do, you have a solution. And the same goes for defense. If you're always setting the same defensive teams, your opponent can just bring the exact counters and be done. The second they set something that's different, everything will go wrong, and it's going to be extremely scary. This is where, obviously, if you're an endgame player, you're going to be utilizing new teams and marquees and potentially new characters such as Leia, which do fit this category. But overall, you're going to be looking at some really good defensive holds by having those flex teams always rotating. So once you've figured out your flex teams and your staple teams, you're probably going to have some filler teams. I'm not going to include that in a section here because it's kind of self-explanatory. If you're a lower GP, you're going to have a few of them. It's just going to be anything you have left over. Now, the next category we got for this video is actually going to be based on the current meta. This can be both through new characters being released, new Omicrons being released, or Datacrons being released. So I've actually included some past examples and then a new one with Gas. So Gas for the current set is actually surprisingly good on defense, guys. I did it in my stream. I took a standard counter, 95% success rate CLS, and Gas just one-shotted because of the crit damage. It was insane. And obviously you can do like the damage reduction ones. There's loads of things you can do currently with General Skywalker that is very Datacron dependent. Then we have the example of Afra again. When she had her Datacron a few months back, she was near unbeatable. Same with GI. So these are examples of teams that you can rotate in for a few months, maybe a few weeks. For example, Phoenix with Rex before people found out the counters was doing okay. Rex with clones, another example. Zori, although she's still a staple now, in the past she was a lot stronger than she is in her current state, because you're taking advantage of the meta at the time. Obviously, if you're someone who is lower GP and you're watching this, you can still take advantage of this, guys. It could be the difference between setting a gear 7 or 8 Zori with like really low gear Finn and Bros and whatever, because it's still going to draw something good. Your opponent's not going to be able to counter it, and unless they're doing a lot of extensive research, they're not going to have a way around it. So these are really good teams to have, and once you kind of set your staple teams, your couple of flex teams, and the current meta, and you integrate it all together, that is your defense set. Remember, guys, you don't have to be setting loads of teams. Only in Kaiba that happens, so you just reduce the amount you need as you go down in the brackets. And then the last topic for today's video is actually going to be based on zone placement, guys. You would think this wouldn't matter, but it's all about setting traps and drawing teams. For example, Sith Eternal Emperor with Savage is undoubtedly the best defensive team in this game right now. The only consistent counter is unfortunately SLKR, who has a pretty high win rate. I'm not including Leia in this, guys, because she's too new. We don't have any data. So if you're watching this in the future, obviously Leia will be counted here as well. So in that circumstance, you need to make sure that Kylo's being used elsewhere. So for example, did you scout your opponent and is Kylo being used on Jabba? We'll set Jabba on the front and C in the back. By doing that, you will take away the main counter, and all of a sudden C gains a lot of damage here, a lot of potential to hold. The same with JML. He can be used as a trap card here, guys. Does your opponent have Reaver and you want Reaver removed? Just set JML. You're giving up a free win here, but you're also removing one of the best characters on your opponent's roster. For example, something I've tried before is trying to make sure Jabba doesn't get two-shotted by Night Sisters. A very common counter at the moment to deal with high relic, decently well-modded dash teams is actually the use of Night Sisters with Merrin. but Nice's Marion is also used for Jabba, and this is where changing your defense really helps you, because if you still always set Jabba, your opponent's going to know he's in the back. But if sometimes you take him off defense and sometimes you move him around, your opponent's not going to have that safety net of knowing that Jabba's there, and they may fall into the trap of using something on a character such as Dash. If this happens, Jabba's more likely to hold. So this is why zone placement is so important, guys, because by changing it up and picking very specifically where you're going to put a team, it changes it completely. Iden is a fantastic example. Iden can either be used as the trap, or Iden can be used as the placement to draw out the trap. And what I mean by this is Iden can be sitting in the back with a easy, Grievous there waiting for Wampa to solo. If this happens, Iden's in a really good spot. Or alternatively, you may have some teams in the back, maybe 1 or 2 teams that Wampa can solo. For example, maybe you have Trench without Wat Tambor down there. Placing Iden in front is that draw. It's going to draw out, the main counter, which in this case is Wampa. And a second Wampa is used, you're in a much better position to hold. Obviously, you don't have to spend this long planning a Grand Arena, but once you kind of work out your staple teams, your flex teams, and you kind of take a little bit of look at this stuff, you can really start to reap the benefits. Obviously, if you're an offensive player, you're probably not going to be interested in this, guys, but overall, I really do recommend at least looking into your defense every so often. If you're like me, you're going to really enjoy planning and looking at the way the meta is developing. And it's also a little bit of a test. If you go very heavy on defense, you can really see your skill with, can you win with the lowest possible, stuff on offense? Like if you don't have anything on offense, are you still going to fall clear? Who knows? Anyways, guys, thank you all for watching. My name is Glurmit. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, guys, have a glowing day.